All right, so welcome to the Solar Power Hour. Taylor, I'll hand it over to you.
Cool. Thank you, Jesse. And thank you for hosting us today. And thank you to those who are joining us today to learn about your solar potential. Uh, as Jesse mentioned, I represent the Midwest Renewable Energy Association, or the MREA. We are a nonprofit founded in 1990, promoting education and demonstration for renewable energy, sustainable living, and energy efficiency. And we do this in a variety of ways, a lot of programs, outward-facing programs. For example, we have an energy fair that's been going on since 1990. That was our founding event. But then we also do accredited training for solar professionals. And then we do education programs like Grow Solar, right? Where we host a group buy for a community and try to make solar more affordable for all. So this is kind of one of our typical solar power hours. It's typically geared towards residency because they don't see an economy of scale like businesses would when they go solar. However, I think all of this education is still really relevant and important when you're considering going solar, whether it is for your business or for your residency. So I will kind of keep reframing it towards businesses, but like for example, we're going to talk about a house that's going solar. So I just wanted to give you that context before we dive deeper, right? And we've been hosting group buy programs since 2013. Milwaukee was our very first program, and we're still hosting some of those throughout the 6 Midwestern states that we've been participating in. But today I'm going to primarily focus on 3 of the programs that we are offering this year. We do kind of go all over the place, but it is a team of 3, right? So we are very limited in capacity in that regard. But again, even if you can't participate in an active group buy here, again, education is power, and that's going to be the first step if you are really serious about going solar, right? And you are welcome to use the MREA as a resource. For example, if you go to www.midwestrenew.org, that is the main organization's website, and we have solar toolkits there. You can also find those solar toolkits on www.growsolar.org. And you can also find out what active group buys we have. So for example, we have Greater Milwaukee, Jefferson and Waukesha, and then Central Wisconsin. So I really encourage you, before you explore solar, is answering your why for solar, right? And some of these whys could be, you want to save money on your electricity or your energy bills. Maybe build equity and gain energy independence. That might be more so for, a residency, but you can still add property value to your property by adding solar, right? So that could be a benefit. You may want to switch to renewable energy to reduce your carbon emissions. And again, maybe that's more residential focus. However, a business approach would be maybe for your audience, that would look good for your branding if you switched, right? So again, why do you want to go solar? And that will kind of influence, whether right now is the right time to go solar or whether you should wait and invest in other things. And we're going to talk more about what that looks like. But again, solar can help mitigate some of these whys, right? Or help achieve these whys. Because when you invest in a solar system, you're effectively locking in your electricity rate for the life of that system, right? So you're no longer just renting your electricity, which you, again, could go into some of the resources for your business. And if it is like a renewable, or excuse me, to reduce your carbon emissions, right? Solar does not pollute things into the air. So again, is that a branding thing or is that a personal thing, which is totally cool too? But why do you want to go solar, right? So today we're going to just talk about how does it work, options and considerations for your property when you want to go solar, because that's going to impact how it's designed and how much it will cost, incentives, costs, and next steps if you're interested in participating in the 3 programs I mentioned earlier, and then kind of, what is Grow Solar? What's a group buy program? We hope to simplify a complex topic. So my favorite section is how does it work? So with any industry, there's lots of jargon, right? And so the first jargon we're going to dispel is kilowatt and kilowatt hour, right? Kilowatt hour is a unit of energy used or produced. And this is what we're going to see on our bills, right? where a kilowatt is a measurement of the capacity. So for example, this could be the size of the array or the system you have on your property, right? So you might need a 7.5 kilowatt system for your business. Every home and every business is different, right? Like your needs and your building will dictate, again, that design and that cost. But just knowing some of this terminology is going to help us going forward. Another thing we like to discuss is just a frequently asked question we get. Does solar even make sense in the Midwest, right? Feels like 6 months of the year, it's winter, right? Does that make viable sense for us to consider solar? So what we're looking at right now is an irradiance map, and that's essentially showing you how much sun exposure we're getting. And so the warm shades indicate a lot of sun, right? And those cool dark shades indicate not much sun. So we have an inset map of Germany, and they had some really great goals to get 80% of their energy sources from renewables by 2030. And they're going to hit that goal, right? And they are deep purples and blues, right? So if Germany can have a goal like that, we in Wisconsin with that lovely shade of green can absolutely make solar viable, right? It is going to be determined on your site and your why, right? But as far as sunlight, we absolutely are getting enough. We have our presenter who likes to say, if we can be an agricultural state, we can be a solar state. And I really resonate with that. So we can do it. So solar 101, how does it actually work, right? So you wouldn't have a house, you'd have your property, but the sun is going to shoot off some sun rays, right? Those sun rays are also known as photons. Those photons hit the solar array, which an array is a collection of solar panels or solar modules. And that's what makes up your solar system, right? So it's hitting that semiconductor underneath that glass. And inside there, electrons are getting excited, and that's generating direct current. Now, or DC current, right? Now that DC current has to go through an inverter, which is essentially like the brains of your solar system. And that inverter is going to translate it into alternating current or AC current. And that's what we use in our properties, right? So a very important component to the solar system. Then it's going to go into an electric meter. Now that electric meter is going to keep track of everything, right? And then with that, it goes to the utility grid if there's any excess. Now, if there is excess, you'll get to take advantage of what is known as net metering. And I'll chat more about that later, but I like to introduce that concept here, right? So the inverter, I mentioned, it is the brains of your solar system, but it's also the heart of your solar system. So again, it's converting that electricity. And there's three main types, right? And there's string, which is kind of like the basic, and then power optimizers and microinverters. Those two are slightly different from each other, but ultimately the goal of them is they try to get more energy out of perhaps like a site that has a little bit of shade, right? So just so you're aware, they come with different price points, right? The string inverter is going to be the cheapest, where the power optimizers and the microinverters are going to have a little bit of a higher price point, right? So just be aware if you do have a conversation with your installer to kind of understand what that looks like, because then you can kind of help plan that a little bit better in the future, especially when it comes to operations and maintenance, which again, we'll talk a little bit later at the end towards that. But they each have their advantages and disadvantages, right? What's cool about inverters nowadays is they offer module level monitoring, which is why it's like the heart of your array. Really encourage you, if your inverter comes with monitoring, to learn how to understand that monitoring, right? Because being a proactive solar owner will allow you to stay on top of any, blips if something were to happen, to mitigate some of those costs, right? It is a system that's going to live well beyond 25 years on this property. And things just are organically going to happen, right? Just like a car, right? It's just going to have something pop up once in a while. However, note though that like if something major does happen, it will get pinged to your installer, right? So don't feel like it's all on you to monitor this, but it's that daily monitoring, or like say weekly monitoring, that you may catch something before it gets worse, right? And then you can again mitigate it before it becomes a bigger cost, right? And again, if you have concerns about that, we highly recommend that you have these conversations with your installer, right? Have them educate you on how to understand this monitoring system, what to look out for, right? So then you feel, confident to monitor. So, when going solar, a lot of folks think, oftentimes of the, like, I'm going to go solar and I'm going to disconnect from the grid. I'm going to be off the grid, right? And for most cases, for people, we're going to assume you're not going to do that, especially probably as a business as well, right? Because there's a couple pros to staying grid tied. So one is it's the least expensive option, right? Going off grid requires you to invest in solar plus storage. And, for a business operating, that's going to be a really big ticket item. It may make sense for some solar plus storage for you, depending on your business. And that will be, again, a conversation I really encourage you to have with your installer. And I really encourage you to explore that why, right? Why do you need solar plus storage, right? And that will, again, help indicate, is it worth it financially to do that for you? But again, it's the least expensive because now you get to use the grid as your battery when the sun is out, right? And maybe, again, that might not be a big thing depending on the type of business you have, right? But we're going to assume you're getting a grid tied system. It also allows for net metering. Net metering is, you're making money off your excess energy you're producing, right? And again, maybe you do or maybe you don't. It will depend on your operations, but it does allow for that optional income, right? Now, please note that when the grid ever goes down, if it ever goes down, if it is a grid tied system, it will shut off, right? And the reason for that is because it needs to shut off for the utility line workers, right? Because it can be very dangerous for them if for some reason a solar system is feeding back into the grid, right? So again, if you need power for those situations, what is your why? And then have that conversation with the installer to understand what your options are, right? And again, a grid tied system is really nice because you get to use it as a battery, right? And again, depending on your application, that may or may not make sense for you, but that's what we're going to assume for the rest of the presentation, that you're grid tied. So one thing to note about grid tied systems and net metering is, well, first, what is net metering? Net metering is a billing mechanism, and this is going to allow you to make extra income on excess production. Now, note that your utility policy is going to vary, your utility net metering policy will vary, right, from territory to territory. So sometimes it makes more sense for others, right, to design your system in a certain way to take advantage of that net metering policy. So that net metering policy is going to influence the size of your system. So for this example, right, we size this system to 73% of their needs, their usage, right, versus 100% because it wasn't advantageous for them to go 100% with their net metering policy, right? So just so you're aware, just that, again, a common idea when it goes to solar is you need to cover all of your needs, right? Again, depending on your utility policy, that may or may not be advantageous for you. Another thing to note is policies can change. And so there is a trend of some of them reducing their amount as well as even phasing out, depending on where you're located. So note that, there is an advantage of going solar sooner than later, right? Because then you can lock in your policy rate and you can get legacied in. Note that if you were ever to add solar in the future, so say like you get like a 7.5K system and then, 5-10 years down the road, you're like, I need 2 more. You could lose that policy and no longer be legacied in because you will have to reapply into this process, right? And that's something your installer will help guide you through. But I just like to note that is like another thing to think about if you're serious about going solar is, the long term. And we're going to highlight more of that later, but I plugged it in here. So I have a sample bill and this may be a good example for some, but maybe not all, right? So I did We Energies. And so pretty much essentially, again, net metering is they're taking the excess that you have produced, and they're subtracting it from what you've actually taken it from the grid, right? So you can make money off of that if that you are a net producer, consumer. Either way, even if that's not the case, you're still not paying for the electricity that you produce and consume. So be aware of that, right? So you take your electricity usage, and then you'll pay for your net usage, and then, or excuse me, I'm going out of order. Electric usage, you'll take that from your solar production, and then you'll pay for your net usage, right? So it's going to look different on all these bills in terms of like what language they're using. But there's usually somewhere where you're going to see that credit. Note though, that your electric bill unfortunately will never be zero, right? And so for We Energies, they have a customer charge. Some utilities will have like a transmission charge or a service charge, right? If you have a grid tied system, you're going to have some sort of charge, and that could be anywhere from $10 to $15, right? So just be aware when you're, crunching these numbers to see if it financially makes sense for you. That can also be a part of it, right? So now we're going to talk about options and considerations, right? Because when a solar installer is doing a site assessment, right, they're seeing if your site is viable for solar. These are going to be some things that they take into consideration, and it's also going to influence your price, right? So we want you to think about that stuff too. So your location and siting, this is the very first step. In this part of the world, we ideally like south facing roof exposure if we can. There's this thing called the solar window, which is 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And this is when you're going to get the most sun exposure and the most production. This is typically where you'd see some of that net metering coming into play. But as a business, this actually might be advantageous for you if that's when your operation hours are, right? So intriguing thing there. But even if you do not have a south-facing roof, you can still make east and west work. Typically what a solar installer will do is they'll just add additional modules to make up the difference, right? With all solar, you want to try to avoid trees, building poles, etc. You can make some shading work, but shading can be a determinant to the viability of solar, right? If it's as simple as maybe you need to trim back a few trees, maybe that's an easy fix, but a building that's not an easy fix, right? So that's why site assessment will be really important to determine if your site is viable for solar. Now there's two common types of solar installs. There's roof mount, which is the most common because it's going to be, again, a little bit cheaper than the alternative I'm going to talk about in a moment, because it comes with the structure, right? Now, it doesn't necessarily need to go on your roof. Perhaps you have like a garage of sorts. We've seen people put them on pergolas, right? Like you can get creative as long as the structure is sound. That's how you can mount it. This is talking about, getting mounted flush to a roof with an existing pitch. If you have a flat roof, they'll do it slightly different. It's called a ballasted system. So essentially what they'll do is they'll, have a weighted system, and then they will probably tilt it up to get more production for your system, or they may not, right? It might be flush to the ground. It kind of just depends on how much space you have. But again, these can be conversations your installer can have with you to explain why they did what, right? But again, with the efficiency of panels nowadays, that's why you typically will see panels just mounted flush against a roof versus like tilting them up for optimal production, right? Because it's so minuscule, again, with the efficiency of panels, that sometimes just adding a panel is easier, right? So things to think about, right? How is it going to be mounted? For roof mount situations, there are some considerations, right? Your roof condition is a really big one, and this could possibly delay the project depending on where you are with the roof condition. Now, we recommend if you're anywhere from 8 years from being or needing a roof to be replaced, we recommend that you replace the roof first. The longevity of these systems, right? Backing up a little bit, the panels themselves are typically going to have a 25-year warranty, right? So, and we see systems living well beyond that. So this is going to be a system that lives and grows with your business, right? So trying to, put it on a roof that needs to be replaced during that lifetime. And then that may just have to happen, right? 30 years, but trying to do that up front will save some of those costs, right? So imagine if you need to replace your roof like 5 years after you've gotten it installed, now you need to call your installer. They have to reinstall everything. You have to coordinate with a roofer, then re-coordinate with the installers to install it, right? That's just a ticket you don't want to pay. So again, really consider your roof consideration. Where does that fit in, right? The type of roof could play a part of, like, maybe you have a type of roof right now and you want to invest in a longer roof, like a metal roof, right? That has a longer lifespan, so you don't have to avoid, or you can avoid some sort of cost like that. Again, these are really great conversations to have with your installer. And they'll be able to, again, confirm if your roof is sound enough to hold solar as well and give you feedback in that regard. Other considerations that are not as heavy as that one is like cleaning, weather, animals. So starting with the cleaning, weather will typically take care of it itself, right? And most folks will just let that happen. You can, rinse it off perhaps in the seasons change, just to like ensure that you're getting the maximum production from your solar system, right? Because dust is a thing, dirt's a thing, bird poop's a thing. That's when that monitoring can come into play, right? If you're noticing that there's, your production's a little slightly off, you could take a look outside and be like, wow, it's really dusty. Like, that's why. Just rinse it off. We typically see that folks, if they do that, right, again, you're not obligated to do so, but if they do that, it's typically when the seasons change, right? Like from winter to spring, fall to winter, right? And then for snow, this is typically going to build up, slowly melt away. And then as soon as those sun rays can actually reach through that snow and hit the semiconductor, that semiconductor is going to warm up and it's going to actually help slide that snow off faster, right? So most people will just, again, let nature do its thing. We have some homeowners who are like really gun-ho about their production and like take a rubber roof rake and try to get it off. And we recommend that if that's safe. But again, it's not required. And again, these are things that your installer is taking account of when they're sizing and designing your system, right? Like weather is going to be a thing in Wisconsin. So it is something that's already considered as part of the design. One thing to note too, I like to plug in here is snow guards. That may or may not make sense for you, just depending on the angle of the roof. Another thing to note too is, like, again, depending on the type of your business, if you have like an asphalt shingle roof and you have like the right angle, right? Sometimes what will happen is that snow will build up and then it will fall, like kind of build up in a clump between wherever the array is and that setback between the edge of the roof. And it can fall as a clump unexpectedly. So just be aware of like what's below. Like, is this the walking pathway to get into your business? We might want to reconsider the site, right? Like, or move the site, or come up with like snow guards or something, right? Or have a plan so like that's not an issue or a liability. And again, these are conversations we can have with installers to again make sure that that's not going to be an issue for you. But I do like to mention it. Another question we get is hail. The semiconductors underneath that glass are really fragile. So the glass is able to withstand 50 mile per hour, 1-inch hail, right? So you should not really have an issue with hail. And if you do, unfortunately, there's going to be more issues than that solar system. And then squirrels. If you have a critter problem now, you may have a critter problem with your solar system. So there is a slight gap between where your solar system is mounted. And so that is a gap that could invite some critters. However, there are things to help protect that. And it's called like Critter Guard is a brand name example. And that's essentially just animal fencing. It will cost a little extra, but when you divide it out for like 20 to 35 years, it's like 30 to 50 bucks a year to protect your wires, right? Which could be a more expensive cost. So things to consider, right? Another option is a ground mounted option, right? And this is really good for perhaps like, again, a business that has much more energy needs than what their roof would allow. Or perhaps your roof is just not suitable for solar because there's a building blocking it, right? So you do need, you know, an area for your ground mounted system. Note that this is going to typically be a more expensive than the roof mounted because now you have to build that structure and there's also trenching, right? So if it's very far from like your electrical, you know, that's going to slowly add some cost. But again, it might make more sense for you if, again, you can get twice the size of the array on the ground versus on your roof, right? Like that ROI might make sense at the end of the day. Again, this is where that site assessment will be really key to discovering, like, again, what works for your property and your needs and your goals. Pros, because it's not on a roof, it's very easy to clean and remove snow or dust, right? So those are the two major types. Now, again, consideration checklist. We're taking a little pause here. I'm cruising through information, right? You may have some questions, but we'll have a nice little summary here, right? So again, what type of system do you think you'll be getting, right? Those are going to have their own considerations, right? With costs, just how much can be mounted, your roof, for example, trenching. Do you have a good solar window? So again, I said that that's when you're getting the most sun exposure from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Can you limit your shading? Do you have limited shading? That will make that solar more viable, more producing for you. You have critter concerns. We're going to talk about energy usage next, but I still like to plug it in here. That's going to be a really big component of how your system is designed, right? Is how much energy are you using? And then I'd like to plug in wish list items here. You know, perhaps you have a specific equipment request, you know, whatever that may be. We talked about solar plus storage earlier. Maybe you want to add EV. Maybe that's part of like the business model. Maybe that's something you want to offer your employees, something you want to offer your customers. Smart electric panels are kind of a new thing that might be advantageous for a business. They're really neat. I'm biased though, because that's where I nerd out. I like this stuff. But again, these kind of things, even if you can't get it right away, I still encourage you to think about it and share these thoughts with your installer, right? Because then they can help, they can take that into consideration when they're designing your system. Same with future energy add-ons, right? So I have like home-based business, right? Growing family, new pool, but like still same things, right? Maybe you're going to start a new product, right? And that's going to eat up a lot of new energy, right? That's something to consider. And that's something you want to converse with your installer, right? They might size your system differently because of that information. You know, again, say you did want to add EVs for your customers, right? Now that's going to add on energy usage, right? So again, having these future wish list items kind of in your back pocket when you're having this conversations with your installers are going to help you make sure that your system is configured in a way where you can allow these add-ons or help make it so it's not a barrier to do these add-ons, right? Because if you don't have this conversation with your installer, they won't plan for this. So then in the future, say 5-10 years, you're growing your business or whatever reason you want to add on, that might be a barrier because your system wasn't configured with that in mind. So again, cannot emphasize that one enough. That's like my thing that I yell to everybody in the village, right? Think about your why, think about your wish list items. So we talked about energy usage, right? And so you don't have to explore energy efficiency to get solar, but I do highly encourage you to consider it, to start thinking about your energy usage, right? Energy efficiency investments have shown return on investment, right? And maybe that's a good first step for you to think about getting solar, right? Because the less energy you consume, the less of like system size that you need, right? Making it cheaper, right? Ultimately, the cheapest energy is the energy you never use in the first place. You know, I know that's a little bit harder, especially with certain business models, but you know, can you make any energy efficiency changes, right? Maybe it's worth getting a commercial energy audit, you know, to understand like maybe your windows need to be resealed, right? Those little things can make a difference. Even just having things plugged in around your property can make a difference. So say, for example, you know, like if you have your office microwave plugged in, that is not the best example, but that's what I'm looking at in my house right now. It's a microwave. But say that's plugged in and it's not turned on, it's not being used, that is sucking up energy, right? It's called phantom loads. Now, is it a huge amount of energy? No. But what if you have something plugged in every single room, right? That's not being used, right? In some cases, it makes sense to have things plugged in, right? Do you have a printer and you have employees that use it, enough in the day where it doesn't make sense to turn it on and back off, right? But other things, right? Like, lighting. Can you have auto switch lighting, right? What's the temperature in the building, right? Little things like that. Like just thinking about your energy usage is a really good step of how you can take energy independence to the next level, right? Because especially if it's a business that is considering solar plus storage, to get the most money out of that storage investment, you really do need to understand your energy management, right? And I can anticipate that that's hard, especially with like employees, but maybe like you can have some fun with it. You can encourage your employees to like use less energy. It sounds kind of dopey, but maybe it might be a really fun element to work culture. But of course, things to be aware of, there are federal and local resources to make energy audits and efficiency improvements more affordable. Focus on Energy is a really great resource. I highly recommend checking them out. And they have a lot of commercial options for folks to explore if they're thinking about energy efficiency. So incentives and financing. So I mentioned Focus on Energy. They also do have a non-residential incentive to go solar. So it's about $50 per kW, up to 25K. So again, it's going to be dependent on the size of your system. If you get a 7 kW or like a 10 kW, right? That's a couple extra $100, debatably, still helps, right? Now, if you're an agricultural producer, you get a slightly different rebate, which is really quite helpful if you do fit in that category. So installers will apply for these benefits on your behalf. And then also, again, as I mentioned earlier, Focus on Energy has a lot of great programs that you can take advantage of for energy saving programs and products. I kept the residential slide in here just because I almost took that out, but I wanted to include some of the language that I don't have reflected on the commercial one, which is the next slide. But right now there is a tax credit that everybody, residential or commercial, can take advantage of. It's 30%, right? Now I'm going to talk about more of the commercial stuff on the flip side. But again, it needs to be owned by you. Doesn't need to be your principal residence. You can add battery storage. And it was extended with the recent Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA. And so it's going to step down and no longer be available at some point. That does change. It looks a little bit different for the commercial entities, but it could, at some point expire. But again, I want to emphasize that that depends on government and policy, right? So at any point, all of this stuff can change. So again, there is some advantage to try to do it sooner than later. But again, just wanted to be upfront with that. So focusing on the commercial side, right? Again, it's going to be 30% that you can take advantage of. It is a tax credit. So it's not like a rebate that you get right away. So it is something you'll have to work with your tax advisor with, or tax professional. Even if you can't take advantage of it, all of it in the first year, it can roll over, right? So again, I highly encourage you to chat with whoever, helps you with your taxes to have a better understanding of like how it will work for you. But it's a really great opportunity to help make solar more affordable. This is just a plug for Solar on School opportunities. This is another program that we offer. Again, it's for schools, so that might not make sense to any of you on the line today, but it is a really great opportunity for Wisconsin folks. So just so you're aware, if you know a school that might be interested, we do have opportunities for them as well. And again, this is focused on home values, but the same could be said about commercial property as well. Realtors are beginning to see the value in solar, right? And so if you compare your business to a business that does not have, or vice versa, right? A business that has solar and a business that doesn't have solar, the business with solar is going to sell for more, right? So they're recognizing that value. I don't have really good research on like, is there a difference between the commercial and the residential, for these numbers, for example. But selling your property with solar, is not going to be a deterrent for you to sell. So that's the emphasis here. So how can we finance for it, right? So we really encourage that you shop around, right? Your financing is going to just have to be tailored to your needs. You know, what works for others is not necessarily going to be the best thing for you. Maybe check in with your local, like your current banking institutions. They might be able to offer you something. We do have two options that you're welcome to explore. It's Green Penny and the Clean Energy Credit Union. You're now seeing a lot of financial institutions kind of offer different types of financing, like, you know, to help cover that 30% tax credit, you know, or do the whole full solar, like covering the whole solar costs. But again, really encourage you to shop around to see what is best for you. So how does it, you know, tally up? How do we pay for this? And so to be fair, this slide is representing a group buy program, right? This is kind of how this would look like. Outside of this, it's going to be slightly different. Obviously, you wouldn't get to take advantage of a group buy program. But essentially, the group buy program is trying to get a bulk rate that's below market pricing for a community, right? So of course, businesses, small businesses are able to participate in our group buy programs. And again, it's going to be more affordable pricing than what you would get outside of the program. Now note, again, depending on the size of the system you need, especially if it's bigger than 20 kW, you are probably going to see your own economy of scale and get some discounts in that regard. But again, you'll see more discounts if you were to participate in a community group buy program, right? And again, is that our program or a different program? You know, either way, there is additional discounts baked in, whether that's upfront, again, with a below market price, or there's like additional participation benchmarks like our program offers, right? So for example, more properties participate, people can expect to get a bigger rebate at the end of the program, right? A little in the weeds, but that's kind of what that works. But again, every property is different, right? We kind of highlighted this earlier. So with this base price, that is going to be price per watt, right? And the reason why they do a price per watt in this industry is because people with people with simple installations would be subsidizing those with really complex installations, right? So this price per watt is essentially kind of a way where you only pay for what you need and what you want. And so things in this industry, they have these things known as adders, and they're not necessarily fancy extras per se. So oftentimes they're going to be things that are required for your system to be properly installed, right? And safely installed, right? So for example, you know, if you have a 3-story or higher building, and this might be different, right? If you have a flat building compared to a tilted, like roof angled building, right? Those people with the angled, like tilted roofs, right, are going to pay more because now your installers need safety equipment to place them up there safely and properly to properly install that solar, right? Other things could just be, you know, the design and the size, right? Again, those larger arrays are going to see that economy of scale. Really tiny baby arrays, they don't get to see that much because again, you still have to have all the same fixed costs, right? But are you going to have multiple PV arrays? So this is a good example here on this house, right? This multiple arrays, you now need more materials, right? You need conduit, wiring. You have to reconnect it all, right, to make sure that it's all working. It's just, again, that's what's the adders for. You know, your panel type, I had on a different slide, you know, maybe your wish list is an American made module. Those are typically just more expensive than, you know, the like call module that they have available. Your inverter type, we mentioned earlier, microinverters and power optimizers are more complex and they have more components than your typical string inverter, right? So that's a cost, right? The complexity of your electrical interconnection, right? You may find out that, you know, you need some upgrades if you want some solar. That just adds, you know, a cost right there. That age and type of the roof, this isn't the most appropriate business example, but if you had a Spanish clay tile roof, you're going to have an adder, right? Because that's not really common in our area. The slope, again, if you have a very steep slope, that could be an adder because, again, additional safety equipment. Do you want critter guard, right? So again, that could be a want or a need, but it is an adder nonetheless. And then we talked about some of these wish list items, right? You know, a smart tech, right? EV chargers, energy storage, additional costs. So we're going to look at an example. And again, this is a residential example, but it still translates, you know, into business. So again, typically they'll give you a size, however many they can fit on the roof or what makes sense to your energy usage. For this house, they did 18 modules or 18 panels, and that's what's making up their 7.2 kilowatt solar array, right? And so again, we're gonna look at a market example. So this is not a group buy example, because this was probably like the most fair to do this. But anyways, we start with our price per watt, and on the market for the state of Wisconsin, 330 is about appropriate. So you do the math because they're getting a 7.2 kW. That's what that's going to turn out to. They have some adders, right? They need a full panel electrical upgrade. Now, this is extreme. I want to note this, but I still think it's a really good adder to be aware of. There is opportunity for the IRA to take advantage of an upgrade for your panel. You can learn more on rewiringamerica.org to see what options might be available for you. But again, extreme example, but I still think it's a great example. They're going to get multiple roof arrays. That adds an adder, right? And then they wanted American-made modules, so that's a want. And so now that's influenced their price to about 28, and their installed cost is about $392. Focus on Energy keeps track of these prices, and about $4 a watt is a pretty average price in the state of Wisconsin for installed cost. Now, you get to take advantage of a federal tax credit, that's 30%. This Focus on Energy rebate again is reflected the residential one, so it was $50 a kilowatt. I should be able to do this math in my head, but she cannot, so we're gonna just do that really quick. And of course, I messed it up on the first try. So I'm still messing that up. That's $350 you would expect, give or take. For a residential rebate, so slightly more for this size. And again, if you were to participate in a group buy, you could, expect a additional discount. But again, you wouldn't be getting a market price, you'd be getting below market price with our program. But either way, that's detracting from this. This is approximately what you could pay on the market. Now, again, this is a smaller system, right? So depending on your business, depending on your energy usage, depending on your energy goals, you could see a different pricing because again, economy of scale, you can take advantage of that where residential cannot, right? But again, you might be a small business and this might actually be an appropriate size array. So I thought it was still a good example, even if it doesn't necessarily, you know, relate to every business who might be joining us or watching this right now. But to see kind of a simple payback, right? You know, we're doing We Energy rating, so this is a little bit more expensive, but it's about 18 kilowatt an hour, or excuse me, 18 cents. And so we took our energy production by our rate, and we're expecting to save about 17,000 in our first year. Now, the payback period's about 12 years, but in about 25 years, you can gain this much. Now, this is assuming our electricity rate remains the same. Note that, you know, it's pretty average that it rises about 2 to 3%. Some years it can be more than that. But if you do get a quote from an installer and they do anything more than 2 to 3%, I feel like that's interesting. I would ask them about it because it's best to go with a conservative number here, but just one thing to note. And again, going back to the group buy, if you were to participate in a group buy, you could expect anywhere from 15 to 20% cheaper. Again, that does vary, right? Like, what are your needs? What is the size? Are you getting a battery, right? If you got a battery, you're probably looking at more like 10% savings versus like 20, right? But again, that is a benefit of a group buy program, but that's pricing. So you have a better idea of that. So just again, talking more about what grow solar is and group buys. I don't know why I wrote property. That was supposed to be grow solar programs. But again, our programs are open to the program territory. So for example, Milwaukee is Milwaukee County, Jefferson and Waukesha is Jefferson and Waukesha counties, and Central Wisconsin is our largest program. And that is like a pretty wide territory. And that one is not officially launched, but it will be launching quite soon. The other two are open and available right now. But again, we have a history of doing this, 65 programs across the Midwest, and we've had 3,400 properties participate. We have had businesses participate. Unfortunately, we just don't have a good tracking record of that. Again, it's a community outreach program. So we really encourage folks to help spread the word. Because again, that's how we take advantage of that economy of scale. If anyone's interested, you start with a free, no obligation site assessment. Note, if you're not unable to participate in this program or you're just going outside of this program, I encourage you to always get a site assessment with your installers. And they should not be charging you for it, right? They may do like a preliminary one, a very simple one, and then do like a different, like a more in-depth one. And that one they may like need more commitment from you. But the first initial one should not cost any money. So again, red flag if that is ever part of that conversation. And then our programs do have a deadline to guarantee our below market pricing. And that's because we can't just like expect our installers to have this pricing available forever. So this is just an example of an installation timeline. It's very, very conservative. And the goal of this slide is just to emphasize that once you start this conversation, you're not going to like get your solar tomorrow, right? And there's also things that are just outside of your installer's hands where, like, for example, you could have solar installed on the property and it might not be flipped on yet because you're waiting for your utility or your city inspectors, right? So just be aware that this can be a time, or it's a journey, right? And then with that, that takes me to the end. We have an annual energy fair. So if you're around Custer around this time, please feel free to pop in, support our program. And yeah, that's all I have. So feel free to please let me know if you have any questions. You're welcome to contact us on our website. And yeah.
Thanks so much. Does anyone have any questions about the solar group buy or how to reach out or just solar questions in general? You can either come off mute or type in the chat.
I was just gonna say, I just really liked it just in general. So, oh, I thought my camera was on. There we go. It was hidden. We're getting solar on a new factory that we're building in New Berlin. And so even just like understanding how solar works, I know that might sound silly, but I don't have even the basics. And so just having that kind of cartoon with how like this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I have it on my screen here. I appreciate that because, you know, I want to be educated in it and we want to educate our employees as well as what is this technology? Why did we decide to do it? So, and I think ultimately, personally, it's like one of my life goals is to have solar on my house. So it was nice to see like the costs and stuff because you hear about it, but you're like, you know, you got the people that like ring your doorbell about it. It's a little bit annoying. So you just kind of want to know what would that really look like. So for me, this was really helpful to just kind of get some of that background basic information, kind of like solar for beginners. I appreciate it.
Yay. Yeah, because I had a hard time. I was like, do I do the regular programming? And I was like, no, education is power, right? And like knowing this, it all kind of matters. So I really am so grateful to hear that.
Yeah. So it was helpful for me. Thank you.
Well, and I was going to say, Nicole, it could be useful. You know, we'll share the recording out of this. So if there's any employees that you think might be interested, I'm sure it's fine to share, right? If you guys are local in Milwaukee, so you might even have employees that might be interested in the group buy. You know, so feel free, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, Taylor, right? Or sharing that out. Yeah, so, even, or just, we could take a clip of it if there's a portion of it that might help educate employees or whatnot. So happy to help with that if that's useful.
Okay, yeah, actually, yes, we have some sites that I could maybe like post it on, kind of like a little communication board that if people are interested, that might be helpful. So yeah, good, thank you.
That would be
Awesome.
so lovely. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions, thoughts? All right, I'm gonna stop the recording.